Okay, so today is going to be a video about me reacting to my first video, Dismantling the Communist Manifesto. Well, my first video. My first, video meaning about like politics and economics. So, political theory, rather. So, basically, I'm going to be reacting to this video and seeing what I got right and what I got wrong, considering I know more about economics and political theory than I knew before, so now I can accurately observe if I got things right or not. But of course I'm still the same anti-communist guy, so I'm not going to be defending Marx, but I might explain his theories in more detail and why maybe I interpreted some of his things wrong. But either way, the ideology just sucks, so let's get into it. Communist Manifesto was meant to be the message to all working people to stand up to their oppressors and gain freedom from their bourgeoisie overlords. In reality, it's nothing more than a deception tactic used to rile up the masses, to divide people based on that artificial division of class that Marx defined in his manifesto. Not sure if it's artificial or rather just pointless, I guess, division, because it's not artificial. I mean, there's some basis. You have the capitalists who own capital and workers who have to work for the capital, but either way, economic mobility is prevalent, and it's a voluntary exchange of labor and money and capital and money. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with voluntary exchange, unlike what Marx put it, unlike what Marx said. So yeah, let's just continue. I don't think it's so basically I don't think it's artificial, I just think it's pointless, the distinction. This division that he created led to discontent and chaos, which allowed an authoritarian government to take over and forcibly establish socialism. Socialism is impossible to achieve voluntarily, at least in a large society. Marx had many flaws in his thinking, and he also let personal biases get into his manifesto. Marx in his manifesto does not see people as individuals with distinct thoughts, behaviors, backgrounds, goals, desires, and many other differences. And yep, that's true. He mostly just divided people based on class, not actual, like also time preference. He didn't consider time preference, that interest is based off time preference, that as well as profit is also gained through lower time preference behavior compared to higher time preference behavior. So he didn't consider time preference. He didn't consider, basically the differences between individuals. So yeah, that's correct, basically. Instead, he just sees people as homogeneous entities separated almost exclusively by class, what he calls the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, that are pitted against one another. A quote from Marx explains his philosophy regarding people. Society. Oh, I actually included quotes here? Oh, that's cool. I think it's because I read the Communist Manifesto before. I just wanted to set up like an essay-like thing disproving it. Okay. As a whole is more and more splitting up to integrate into two great hostile camps. Into two great classes directly facing each other, bourgeoisie and proletariat, taken from the manifesto of the Communist Party. Yet, Marx does not consider the individuals within these so-called great classes, even if we consider his class divisions, which on their own are not accurate due to that. So collectivism, always one execution away from utopia. Yet, it's always blame this group and we're going to achieve greatness. Kill this group and it's going to be great, like Nazis with Jews, Marx with bourgeoisie, nationalists with their opposing group. Oh, ultra-nationalists. Not, nationalists are okay, but I'm talking about the ultra-extreme nationalists. Social and economic mobility. He still fails to recognize the individual thoughts and whether people even want this class struggle in the first place. Many people in the time of the Industrial Revolution did not feel oppressed or were oppressed in any way. Yep, that's true. That's what Marx also didn't consider, is, are people really feel oppressed? And the answer to that is, yeah, maybe the working conditions sucked, but it was the best thing that they had. So, and also the fact is that owning a factory was not for free, and he wasn't just stealing the workers' labor. He actually the factory owner spent money on the factory, to start it, to maintain it, and to provide workers with a way to make money without the risks of owning the factory. And because a lot of these factory owners went out of business, became bankrupt, and they basically became, I guess you could say poor, because they made a risk and they suffered because of it. A lot of these factory owners, because it was super expensive to maintain and run a factory. A lot of them didn't make profit, but a lot of them didn't. So it's not always this oppressed oppressor, because these people who were the factory owners were not always successful. They didn't always make profit. A lot of them lost money and had deficits because it was very expensive to maintain and run this factory, and actually preferred working in the factory compared to other alternatives, as this was beneficial for themselves and the society. The Industrial Revolution was characterized by immense progress regarding technology, the economy, and the improvement in life, in the quality of life of an average individual. Things were rapidly changing, and old norms and ideas are being questioned and replaced with newer and more sophisticated ideas. Yep, that's one, because every one of these socialists think that the Industrial Revolution, no, not everyone, I don't want to generalize, but a lot of these socialists, and even some other non-socialists, think that the Industrial Revolution was some kind of horrible thing that made everything worse. No, it was a transitionary period between the old agricultural economy and the modern technological economy. It was a transitionary point. So yeah, maybe it wasn't that good, but compared to the living conditions before, it was certainly better. Marx believed that everyone, down to the last individual, would be willing to give up the improvements in their lives for something as abstract as a class war. Overall, I believe that one of Marx's fundamental flaws was not seeing people as individuals, rather than seeing people as collective groups. Another flaw of Marx's philosophy, was his belief that people would voluntarily give up their property for the greater good of society. Actually, I'm wrong here. Marx actually did recognize that people. This is not in defense of Marx, but obviously, because that's even worse, because he believed that people would not that's actually where I'm wrong here. He did not think that people would voluntarily give up their property. That's why people should kill and take away their property. So he believed that the proletariat would have to kill or steal from the bourgeoisie, which is in itself completely wrong, because nothing justifies theft and murder. Absolutely nothing. And before I will continue, this is exactly what's happening now. The greater good. Give up your freedom for the greater good. Anyways, let's continue. People like to. Yep. Give up your guns. Don't worry, the government will protect you. Naturally own things. Have, are, and will continue to compete for the privilege of owning certain things. Specifically, most of the conflicts in human history were caused by land disputes. Georges be like, collectively owning land, even though land is literally a scarce economic resource that still applies to the same private property as other goods because it's scarce. Marxism, calls for the total abolition of private property in favor of a collective solution where no one owns anything and property can be used by anyone, also known as common property. The main issue of this is stated in the beginning of this entire passage is the human nature, the natural human behavior. A quote from the Manifesto that describes Marx's views on property is a quote from Marx. In this sense, the theory of the communist may be summed up in a single sentence: abolition of private property. Another quote also explains it. When therefore capital is converted into common property, into the property of all members of society, personal property is not thereby transformed into social property. Yeah, this is kind of where I misunderstood him again a little bit. Well, because Marxists and socialists do indeed make the distinction, the arbitrary distinction that is, but still the distinction between personal property and private property. So personal property is things like food, water, like clothes, and The things they can actually like carry, I guess. And private property is things like factories and land and things that should be owned collectively. But the same issues, again, as I said, still apply to capital goods like factories and machinery. It's like if it's collectively owned, effectively that means that it's not owned by anyone, because a collective is not an entity, so it's only individuals that can own things. So if more than two individuals own the same thing, it's not that both of them own the same thing, it's that none of them own it. So common ownership of capital would have the same issues as non-capital. Who's responsible for this property? Who's responsible for maintaining it? Who's liable for the expenses? Who has to pay? And the problem is that no one really is responsible for it, so no one pays the expenses. Thus, no one's responsible for it, and it cannot be maintained. So no one wants to maintain it. Nothing's going to get done under this common ownership of capital. In addition, the same economic flaws apply. Like, how are they going to determine more and less valuable use of social labor and products? How are they going to determine what consumers need and want? How is different uses of labor going to be distinguished? How are you even going to have capital markets? If it's collectively owned, which means that no one really owns the capital, how are you even going to decide the price of this capital? There will be no capital markets. No one's responsible for capital. Thus, nothing will be produced. No consumer goods will be produced, and society will just collapse because the common ownership of capital doesn't work, because no one's responsible for this capital, and it completely denies all the laws of economics. Like, how are there going to be market prices? How are you going to distinguish expenses versus revenue? How are you going to calculate the most efficient use of resources? It just is uneconomical. It's not only uneconomical, but impractical from every point. What Marx is saying is not only ludicrous and impossible due to human nature, it's also very inefficient when it comes to economics. Yep. This system will not allow the hardworking people to receive more for their work, and instead everyone will receive the same things regardless of how much they work. In capitalism, the main driving force behind working more is receiving more in the monetary exchange unit, also known as what normal people call money. It's not really about working harder per se, it's more about working smarter. Making smart. It encourages lower time preference behavior, such as deferring consumption, investment, and risk-taking, rather than just producing, consuming immediately, producing, consuming, in this mindless cycle of mindless consumption and production to meet no end. It discourages that. It also encourages the efficient use of resources. It's not about working harder, it's more about kind of working smarter. It incentivizes people to use resources efficiently and to make smarter economic decisions that require lower time preference. So capitalism encourages lower time preference, and socialism systemically promotes higher time preference behavior. Use your greater supply of money to buy things from other people. This will benefit everyone in the society, not only through the greater wealth this generates and capital, but also because more jobs are created for people to work in and produce, and to also sell goods and services to produce, yeah. Yep. In socialism, there is no such goal or desire for people to have. Since everyone gets the same thing, no matter how much or how little they work, there is literally no incentive to work. This causes laziness and greed to take over in such a society, and if nothing is done, the society will completely collapse. This is why an authoritarian state is usually needed to enforce this working process. However, in order to enforce it, you need people to actually want to enforce it. Yep, I'm completely right here. Because common ownership of the means of production, or capital, doesn't work. It just is an uneconomical thing. The state, and because socialism, of course, requires the violation of property rights. And what is the organization that is built on the systemic and legal and safe, quote-unquote, safe method of the violation of property rights? The state. So, of course, socialism, because it's built on the violence and the violation of property rights, and the state is also built on that same principle. They're perfect for each other, statism and socialism. There's no such thing as socialism without the state. It simply doesn't exist. Because not only is socialism uneconomical, but also because the violation of property rights needs to be enforced via the state. The state has thousands of bureaucrats willing to do this, to enforce the socialist policies, which only further reduces the wealth in the society, which goes towards the actual working man. That's ironic, by the way. It's like, we care about the working people. Also, let's give more power to bureaucrats who will screw over the working people. Keck. Overall, this is another flaw in Marxist philosophy. The final flaw that I will be discussing, because otherwise this will be too damn long, is the family unit. Marxist philosophy with regards towards the family unit were simple. And by the way, before moving on, this is extremely progressive, and this is quote-unquote progressive, and this is what's going on in today's society too. The Marxist philosophy with regards towards the family unit was very simple. It shouldn't exist. Instead of what we call a family unit with a mother, father, children, Marx believed that the community should raise and educate the child. The reason for this, again, who's a community? There's no definition for the community. And it always happens to be like the community is always quote-unquote represented through the state. So basically what the community means is the government every time. When socialists talk about the common ownership or community, common ownership and community basically means state. Once again, is due to his belief that a family unit, which is the relationship between parents and a child/children, teaches children the capitalistic and bourgeoisie mentality. Another quotation from him explains his mentality regarding the family. The bourgeoisie claptrap about the family and education, about the hollowed correlation of parents and child, becomes all the more disgusting the more by action of modern industry the family ties among the proletarians are torn asunder, and their children transformed into simple articles of commerce and instruments of labor. End of quote. I don't know why I didn't say that before. Whatever, let's continue. Marx's major flaw, like all of his ideas, Communist Party,
is down to not understanding basic human behavior. People, more specifically parents, want to, at least most of the time, if they're working correctly and not completely insane, own and have children to themselves. And they want,
well, not own, like literally own. You don't own your child's physical body, only they own your physical body, but guide them, raise them, rather.
Want to raise their children. They want to feel responsible for their children and teach them and pass on their beliefs, traditions, and values. The reason for this is down to biology. We have evolved like all of the species to adapt, spread our genes in order to sustain our species.
See, that's what Marx ignores, isn't his dialectical materialism. He thinks that human nature is not static. It's not through genes. It's determined through machines and the external environment. So it can be changed if the external environment changes. But this is simply wrong. Because as I explained, we have certain genes and certain instincts. Yeah, we can maybe change over time slightly, but our basic goal, like all other species, is to expand and spread our genes, as I stated here.
We assume that everyone, even if every single person, agrees to Marxist plans for the family unit, there would still be other major issues. The abolition of the family unit would lead to a, let's just say, not a very good situation, where children would feel like they don't belong.
Freaking Discord, man. Piece of shit.
And they would not be able to succeed. In addition, many people probably will not want to have kids, seeing as there's no point, since you can't raise your kid. Like, what's the point? And that will bring many other psychological side effects, which will be devastating for the society as a whole.
Yeah, psychological is one thing, but the main problem is not even that. It's that who's the community again? It always happens to be the state, because Marx's dictatorship of the proletariat will represent the proletariat, and who is really the dictator? What organization claims to represent the common people? The organization which is the systemic violation of property rights and is liars. Alright, the government. So it's always the state that represents the common man, even though they literally don't. Like, they never do.
Marx also is very obsessed and biased with the people he calls bourgeoisie.
This is an ironic quote, because Marx meant it as key people, because Marx basically meant that since his theory of dialectical materialism and human evolution was basically that the workers or the lower class was always exploited by the higher class. He basically meant that the lower class, if you keep them from their history, they're easily controlled by the higher class. But you can use this quote to actually counter the Marxist philosophy by basically saying that, like, when there was a socialist regime, for example, and like that keep people away from the history of the brutality of socialism and the state in general, they are easily controlled by the state. So you can actually use this quote to counter his own philosophy, which is kind of funny. Although you could do that with probably many other quotes, so yeah.
I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce that. I don't know how to pronounce it. Bourgeoisie? I don't know.
Bourgeoisie.
No, sorry. He constantly repeats and uses the term bourgeoisie to refer to everything that he thinks is wrong with society. A quote from the Communist Manifesto describes it. The bourgeoisie has torn away from the family in sentimental veil and has reduced the family relation to a mere money relation. And here it becomes evident that the bourgeoisie is unfit any longer to be the ruling class in society and to impose its conditions of existence upon society as an overriding law. It is unfit because it is incompetent to ensure an existence to its slave within his slavery, because it cannot help letting him sink into such a state that it has to feed him instead of being fed by him. Society can no longer live under the bourgeoisie. In other words, its existence is no longer compatible with society.
What the hell is that quote? Like, that's the thing about all these socialist philosophers, is they like to make up, like, kind of like lies and then put a little bit of truth into them, just a tiny amount, and then cover the lie with the fancy language. It's always what they like to do. I don't even understand what the hell he's talking about, but I know that his ideas are completely wrong. So it's like, as basically Reagan said, or I think it was Reagan, that a socialist reads Marx and Lenin, but a anti-socialist or a person who understands Marx and Lenin is against them. I don't know exactly, I already forgot the quote, but basically something along those lines.
Marx in his manifesto has blamed almost every single...
This meme is so funny. I feel an uprising in my lower class at the thought of access to your major means of production. Oh my god. Why is this so funny? I don't know.
Issue of humanity, not on the mistakes as people as a whole, but rather on one single group that Marx considers by far the most evil thing in society, or concept, the bourgeoisie. As I explained already, the so-called bourgeoisie is not a homogeneous entity, but rather a collection of various individuals with different ways of interpreting what Marx wrote. The reason for Marx's blaming of the bourgeoisie is due to his personal life. But personal biases should never be in politics, or be included in the description of an ideology, or the analysis of an event. Looking back at this, the Communist Manifesto has many very clear and fatal flaws, and Marxism, and socialism, and communism, and collectivism, and every single leftist ideology has many very clear and fatal flaws that are very apparent when looking at basic human behavior. It completely ignores the concept of individuality, natural human behavior, the benefits of capitalism, traditions, and several other things.
Not even the benefits of capitalism, but the basis of capitalism. Yeah, the benefits of capitalism are obvious, but most people don't know the basis of capitalism, which are property rights, and why they are so essential. Socialism completely ignores property rights, as always.
As I mentioned already, the Industrial Revolution was
Let's go, Ludwig von Mises. See, this is a brilliant quote. If one rejects laissez-faire on account of man's fallibility, I'm just the same person as before. I cannot pronounce words when I'm recording, but I can when I'm reading off a script. Fallibility and moral weakness. One must, for the same reason, also reject every kind of government action. This, because since people are naturally imperfect, giving them a monopoly on violence and giving them the right to regulate and control the economy isn't going to make anything better. This is a brilliant quote because it rejects completely the status, basically, that governments somehow are the people, but they're better than all the other people. No, they have the same errors as every other human. But giving them a monopoly on violence is only going to make things worse because it exacerbates the errors, or rather the imperfectness of human action.
was an era of great development of progress. This was primarily caused by laissez-faire capitalism. Of course, there was still a lot of government corruption and cronyism during this time, but that doesn't change the fact that Marx completely ignored the benefits of capitalism.
I mean, he did say that capitalism was an improvement to feudalism. So he did, I guess, kind of accept that it was better than feudalism. He actually did. He actually stated that capitalism was essential for socialism, but his theories, which I'll cover in a different video, like the tendency of the rate to profit will fall, was his main one of why capitalism will fail, are completely wrong. They're just not correct.
Marx also failed to give an example of what a system would actually look like in practice. Summing up everything that I have said, the Communist Manifesto is nothing more than mere propaganda. It has this.
Why the fuck? Oh my god, man. It's like. Oh my god. Why the frick everything costs money? Karl Marx and Frederick Engels. It costs money because of greedy capitalists who's stealing from the workers' labor, even though that's not how it works, but okay, labor theory of value. Let's go.
Slogans and style of writing to rile up the masses, but has little substance to actually back these socialist claims.
Yeah, that's completely true. Socialism is a populist political ideology that is based on... It is actually populist. There's such thing as left or socialist populism. Because it relies on emotions rather than logic. And since people are mostly tied to emotions, well, not always, but mostly, socialism says that the community will take care of us. That the one group, aka the bourgeoisie or the capitalist, steals and makes the life worse of the lower class, and that we need to overthrow them. But it completely ignores how, quote-unquote, the bourgeoisie gain capital, how they gain wealth, and how even the economy works. So it's like basically just, again, it's the same kind of form of fallacies of collectivism. Just blame one group is the cause of suffering for the entire world. For Marxists and socialists, it's the upper class or bourgeoisie. For Hitler, it's the, Jews mostly, as well as his communists, which there's direct competition, control of individuals, so it's direct competition for Hitler. For fascists and all other ultranationalists, it's opponents of the state and the nation state, opponents of the nation state. And for other collectivists, it's just like blame one group. For these modern cultural Marxist collectivists, it's the straight white males, man. It's the straight white rich males. They're the biggest problem. So it's always just one group is responsible for the failures of the world and the reason why the world sucks, or rather, why the world is not as good as it should be. Kill all those people and the world will become better. But that's not how it works. The world isn't just, oppressed oppressor. The world is individuals who act, create culture, and create wealth as well. It's individuals that act. Only individuals act. That's it. Okay. Thank you guys for watching this reaction video. It's a little bit different, but thank you. Goodbye, and enjoy the rest of your day.